really only looking. I mean, we really only know about 5 or 3 people that are going to be on our team next year. But I feel like we have a great core. Our first priority is to sign Kelsey Mitchell back, was the first team all WNBA last year, and is my running mate in the backcourt. So she let it be known, Kelsey Mitchell is probably coming back. I told y'all, once Kelsey Mitchell made that post, that killed everything. Now, this is
Caitlin Clark made her presence felt in Oklahoma City well before the cameras even turned on. Prior to going live on NBC during the Knicks vs. OKC game, Clark took time outside to sign autographs and connect with fans in the city, a moment that quickly spread across social media and set the tone for everything that followed. The biggest piece of news to come out of her NBC segment was her comments on Indiana Fever free agency. Clark addressed the uncertainty around the roster directly, acknowledging that right now only about 3 to 5 players are confirmed to be returning next season.
This is Caitlin Clark talking about.
We're just finding out about, or
it's a new hobby. Yeah, you didn't even show my pictures of LeBron. I took. Did you guys see them?
Oh, I saw because he reposted them.
Absolutely.
I saw them. Oh, there it is. Look. Yeah.
During this segment here, Caitlin Clark was talking about the photos that she took, and LeBron actually shared some of the photos. He looked right at her for the camera, almost like a pose. He struck a pose.
Those weren't too bad. That was my greatest shot.
That's your greatest shot right there.
Wait a minute. Every artist
I need to print it out, get him to sign it for me.
Every artist names it. What's the name of it?
The King. I mean.
Despite that, she expressed confidence in what the team has built and made one thing crystal clear: signing Kelsey Mitchell back is the organization's top priority. Mitchell earned first-team All-WNBA honors last season and has been Clark's primary backcourt partner. Those comments effectively shut down the speculation that had been building around Mitchell possibly leaving, with fans and analysts noting that Clark's directness on the subject should put those trade rumors to rest, even if some corners of the internet will keep the conversation going regardless. Beyond the roster talk, Clark's segment covered a wide range of ground.
I mean, that's my goat, honestly. So
you know what's cool about this for you, and you know Ken Griffey's doing it because of who you are and what you've accomplished, and you're known by players. You're going to get the best pictures, and you're going to get everybody to pose for you.
I swear we made eye contact, so I set down the camera and I smiled.
So they're basically telling Caitlin she's going to get the best pictures. And I like this segment. She's not with Reggie Miller. She's with Carmelo Anthony. It looked like Candace Parker, too, as well.
She shared that photography has become a new interest, and the LeBron James photos she captured became a talking point in themselves. James had apparently noticed her camera, made direct eye contact, and struck a pose, a moment Clark described as one of her best shots. James later reposted the images, amplifying the moment further. The panel around her, which included Carmelo Anthony and Vince Carter among others, pointed out that her profile means she'll always get genuine, unguarded access to the biggest names in the sport, which makes her photography hobby a natural fit.
Too, as well. My apologies, that is not Candace Parker, but that is Tracy McGrady right next to her.
He just looked at me with a straight face. I'm like, he didn't even see me, but the photo turned out well. But new hobby, I love it. So
people are going to stop.
And that's Vince Carter, and that's Vince Carter there too with her. Shout out to Correlation. Correlation got a bunch of clips, and this shot right here was insane.
Better than this guy. Get it into Boozer, back to Sharp, ahead. Right here. Boozer, that ball deflected.
My goodness!
2 seconds. Mullins tosses it up.
That's from the.
Clark also weighed in on Nikola Jokic, calling him her favorite player to watch and stating plainly that she considers him the best player in the world right now. She highlighted his back-to-back seasons averaging a triple-double as something that almost defies comprehension at the professional level. When the conversation shifted to her broader role in the growth of women's sports, Clark kept things grounded. Rather than positioning herself as someone on a mission to transform the landscape, she framed it as simply showing up and being herself.
Mullins tosses it up.
That's from the logo. From the logo.
It's good.
Wow. Everybody's talking about that shot. I might have to make a separate video about that. But this was Caleb Parker. So is that Connor? So everybody has been wondering where Connor been. And Connor is right there next to me.
That approach, consistent, unforced, and focused on the work, has drawn significant attention in its own right. Clark also touched on the new CBA during the broadcast, specifically the salary structure and the revenue-sharing model, describing it as a meaningful shift that signals genuine value being placed on what players produce on the court. Her view was that the agreement sets a precedent not just for women's basketball but for women's sports more broadly. On the coaching front, speculation about Stephanie White's future with the Fever appears to be largely unfounded.
Where Connor been, and Connor is right there next to me. So Caitlin Clark, hold on, her go another.
He could to get back, and I mean, there's not many people that average a triple-double, let alone you're lucky enough to get maybe a couple of those in a season. He's done it all year long in back-to-back years, so it's pretty incredible, and honestly, he's probably my favorite player to watch, and I think he's the best player in the world.
I think it's the mental fight.
Mississippi, I think everybody...
White remains under contract for the 2026 season, meaning any move would only become a real conversation after the season concludes, and even then, it would depend entirely on how things go. The Kelsey Mitchell situation was always the more legitimate storyline, given that she was genuinely a free agent. Clark's comments during the NBC segment appear to have resolved that particular debate, at least for now. Clark's appearance in OKC generated significant online traction, with the WNBA sharing photos from the evening and her name circulating widely across platforms throughout the night.
Mental fight.
Mississippi, I think everybody...
Caitlin Clark just said Jokic is the best player in the world. Wow. Wow.
To preview the upcoming WNBA season. Feel like, and for someone who's like literally right in the middle of it and everything's happening right now, like what do you feel like your role is in the growth of women's sports?
Man, I honestly think I'm just very much myself. That's how I try to approach it. I'm not here. This was never my goal to change women's sports.
Caitlin Clark took a very humble.
At this point in the calendar, with the season approaching and momentum building around the league, that kind of visibility has become something close to routine for her. There is a significant development brewing in the WNBA ahead of the expansion draft, and it signals that franchises have been doing serious work behind the scenes well before free agency officially opens. The first domino appears to be falling, and it centers on the Toronto Tempo. Portland Fire holds the top selection in the expansion draft among the two new franchises, with Toronto picking second.
This was never my goal to change women's sports.
Caitlin Clark took a very humble approach during this. She was asked, how do she feel about changing women's sports? And Caitlin Clark simply just said, she's basically coming to work. You know what I'm saying? Oh, wow. So we found the footage of Kelsey Mitchell. Let's play it right now.
Out there. Last time I went to the finals in 2015. Okay, you guys made the Simmons of the East last season. You had to watch from the sideline. Yeah, it's tough. Expectations, goals of this season, what you got for me? I mean, we were...
Dropping one spot is not a catastrophic shift. The gap between the 6th and 7th overall picks in the WNBA draft, for instance, could come down to prospects like Ty and Lat Johnson, who are viewed at roughly the same level anyway. The real story is not about draft order. What has captured attention is the growing likelihood that the Toronto Tempo are pursuing Bridget Carleton, either through the expansion draft or through free agency. This was a widely anticipated move, and it makes straightforward sense.
Of the expansion draft. And obviously, the team that is taking first in the expansion draft is Portland Fire. The team that's taking first of the two teams in the WNBA draft is the Toronto Tempo. Again, is it the biggest deal in the world going down one pick? I don't think so. I really don't. I think we're pretty okay in general when it comes to a lot of these picks. I think that the difference between 6 and 7 could be the difference between taking Taya Latz and Flaw J. Johnson, who are both probably seen as a very similar level prospects.
Toronto is Canada's team. Carleton is Canada's best player. The alignment is obvious in a way that other rumored targets simply are not. The Sophie Cunningham speculation that circulated earlier never had the same logic behind it.
And as a very similar level prospects. So I don't really think that makes that much of a difference. However, it appears that the Toronto Tempo are looking towards getting Bridget Carleton, whether it be in the expansion draft or free agency. I'm not 100% sure, but this was expected by a lot of people. I think a lot of people expected Carleton to be going to the Tempo. Why? Because the Tempo are a team in Canada, and it makes the most sense for them to get the best Canadian player. It just does. It makes the most sense for the team.
Cunningham generates social media engagement, but that is a different thing from putting people in seats. Ticket selling power in the WNBA belongs to a very short list. Caitlin Clark at the top, then Paige Buchers and Angel Reese to varying degrees. Cunningham is not on that list. Carleton, meanwhile, offers something different and arguably more valuable for a first-year franchise: genuine local identity.
Most sense for the team in Canada to get a Canadian. It makes way more sense than people predicting Sophie Cunningham, because Sophie Cunningham sells tickets. I just want to make this very clear. Sophie Cunningham does not sell tickets. Sophie Cunningham, what she does is she'll get you some social media clicks. She doesn't sell tickets. Players that sell tickets in the WNBA, even to an extent, depending on the game, Angel Reese to an extent. Angel Reese does sell tickets. Not quite Caitlin Clark.
There is a feel-good quality to a Canadian team building around a Canadian star that no amount of social media buzz can replicate. The signals have been direct. Carleton recently removed the Minnesota Lynx from her Instagram bio, removing any assumption that she is returning there automatically. Then the Toronto Tempo's president followed Carleton on Instagram, small gestures individually, but together they sketch a clear picture of where things are heading.
Level. But like individuals that if they show up on your team will start selling tickets is probably Paige Buchers, Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese. Is that it? Is that it? Really? Like, I mean that. I could be honest here. It could only be those players that actually like truly sell tickets. But at the same time, if you're Toronto Tempo, you might want a feel-good player to have in there, and that's where
the financial dimension matters too. Toronto enters the league with enormous cap flexibility. They can offer Carleton a supermax and still have room to bring in another significant free agent. This is not a situation where budget forces a compromise.
You want a feel-good player to have in there, and that's where you bring in the Canadian player. That's you bring in the player from your country in the first team in Canada. And not only that, if you haven't seen. So a couple of days ago, Bridget Carleton on Instagram took Minnesota Lynx out of her bio. So she took the team out of her bio, with obviously the implication being there's no guarantee of her being a member of the Minnesota Lynx. Not only did she take the Minnesota Lynx out of her bio, yesterday, the Toronto Tempo president...
The Tempo can simply pay whatever it takes. There is a useful comparison from last year's expansion process. The Golden State Valkyries selected Monique Billings in the expansion draft, but Billings was not forced into it. She was not under a cord contract and made an active choice to join the new franchise. That distinction matters.
The Toronto Tempo president, Tessa Resch, followed Bridget Carleton on Instagram. Shout out to all the Instagram detectives showing all of these, finding out all of these things. And it seems like this is the obvious path that they're going towards. And it makes so much sense. Like, it makes so much, and I mean so much sense to do this, lads. It never made, like, the Sophie Cunningham one made no sense.
Carleton would be in a similar position, and the expectation is that she would welcome the opportunity to become the face of a franchise in her home country from day one. The Valkyries' experience, however, should not be used as a template for what comes next. That roster was built by identifying players who had been significantly undervalued by existing teams, poor coaching, inadequate scouting, and scooping them up unprotected.
Like, the Sophie Cunningham one made no sense. There's no feel-good factor about bringing Sophie Cunningham in. Okay, you might get some social media notoriety, but there's no feel-good factor of bringing in a Canadian player. There's no, obviously that is a negative, not having, like, it's a positive. There are going to be people that are going to be pissed off at you having Sophie Cunningham, which you don't want to do as an expansion franchise, especially one in Canada. You don't really want things not to be
That pool of overlooked talent does not exist in the same way heading into this expansion cycle. Almost everyone eligible is an unrestricted free agent rather than a young, underexposed prospect. As a result, the expansion draft itself is likely to produce a much smaller haul than many expect, somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 players per team rather than a franchise-defining wave of pickups.
In Canada. You don't really want things not to be 100% positive, because, again, things can go south real quick. I don't think we realize how quick things actually have the ability to go south for an expansion team. Just because the Valkyries went so well does not mean that all these other teams are going to go well. That being said, you would hope that the Toronto Tempo can pull it off and do a good job when it comes down to it, but there's no guarantee of it. And
Toronto has already sold out its season ticket inventory. The hype around the franchise exists independent of any single roster decision. But signing Carlton would be more than a marketing move. It would be a foundational statement about what the Tempo intend to be, and it would give the fan base a genuinely compelling reason to invest emotionally in the team from the very beginning.